Welcome to the first episode of No Dice, a podcast series talking about female gambling addiction and stories of recovery across Scotland. I'm your host of the series, Kat Cochrane, and having been in compulsive gambling recovery for 4 years, I'll be sharing my own journey towards the goal of a gamble-free life. Alongside me, I'll be joined by other women sharing their stories of gambling harm recovery, as well as gaining insights from those affected by gambling behaviours of friends or family members. I'll also be gaining insight and knowledge from people working in gambling support services across Scotland, as well as those working towards fighting the power of the gambling industry in advocacy or policy making roles. To kick us off, I wanted to share a little bit about the why of this podcast series and my motivation behind it. During my time in recovery, I've learned that gambling addiction and gambling harm in Scotland has been recognised as a public health issue in the same way drugs, alcohol and smoking are. By definition, a public health issue is one that adversely affects individuals, families and the wider community. And it's for that reason that brings up the need for the conversations within this podcast series. If something is recognised to the point of being confirmed by the Scottish Government as a public health issue, there has to be as much awareness around it as possible. We're talking about it with the motive of helping women who are struggling with their gambling and point the way to help, advice and support where we can. A public health approach is required in Scotland and the UK, and this podcast will help focus on the issues relating specifically to women, in terms of financial difficulties, mental health issues, relationships, and in severe cases, crime, homelessness and suicide. But something I'll be pointing out in every episode of No Dice is that gambling addiction and the effects created by it are not terminal, and stories of recovery and healing are real. As a content warning, this episode does cover themes of addiction and gambling behaviour. Joining me as guests on this first episode of the No Dice podcast are two colleagues from RCA Trust, who I'm proud to be partnering with for the series. First, we have Maria, who is Gambling Training and Education Officer, and alongside Maria is Katie, who works as a Gambling Support Practitioner for RCA Trust service users across Scotland. Thank you both for joining me and lending your knowledge and experience around the theme of this episode, why women gamble is different from why men gamble. Now, to kick us off, can I both ask you to share a little bit about the roles that you do here at RCA Trust and how it connects and supports women experiencing gambling harm?
Yeah, so as Kat said, my job's around gambling, training and education. So essentially a big part of my role is kind of upskilling people, raising awareness around gambling harms and most importantly, breaking that stigma. And when it comes to women and gambling, it's certainly a topic that I like to focus a lot of my time on, especially when I'm talking to people, whether it be people in front-facing roles, people with lived experience of potentially other addictions, or just the general public, because it's one of these themes, especially underneath the umbrella of gambling harm, that goes unnoticed and there's not a lot of knowledge around it. The kind of idea behind all that is to increase access to support for women and break down some of those barriers that they might be experiencing. So as much as I'm not directly client facing all of the time, I do as much as I can with the education and prevention work.
And so I'm Katie, and as you said, I'm a support practitioner. That involves sort of one-to-one support. I come from a counselling background, so I can do that deeper stuff. I can also work with women, signposting them towards group work, towards peer support, but most of my work is that one-to-one in these wee rooms alone, providing that support. But I also go out into communities and have been raising more and more awareness wherever I can, especially about the harm that women specifically are experiencing for gambling. And I also fight against the industry at any chance I am given, any opportunity.
We fight the good fight, and that's something that we continue to do. That's great, guys. Thank you. Something I'm really keen to lay the ground with in this first episode is the experiences of women when they're living through their own gambling harm. And that can be at any stage that women are specifically on, and how that differs from men. And with this in mind, can I ask you, from the stories shared with the women you've supported, have you seen patterns and the reasons why women specifically have got into gambling?
Yes, and this is anecdotal, but when I first started, it was predominantly men I was working with, and over time there are more and more women, and I have noticed a very distinct pattern, and that is predominantly that there is trauma, escapism and coping. Those are the three I see over and over again. In fact, I can only think of one woman client that I work with who doesn't have gambling as a coping mechanism or escapism type from some kind of trauma or really difficult life circumstances. Whereas I've noticed with men, there is such a variety of reasons that has become a problem and that they're seeking support. But with women, pretty damn consistently, it is trauma. Trauma-based or escapism-based. Yeah, with men, I've noticed I've got a wee list here of chasing highs, chasing losses, a false logic, intellectual challenge, fun, interesting, upping the ante with sports, and habit that's spun out of control. Yet with the women clients I've been working with, it has consistently been escapism. So yeah, it's been quite significant to notice that. Not ideal, but it's one of the more hidden harms that I have noticed over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as women, we carry so much baggage emotionally, don't we? And I'm not saying that men don't carry baggage, but we carry it in a different way and we often carry it for others. And that's something that I've thought about quite a bit. And I'm really keen to hear your thoughts from both of you on the idea that women experience gambling in an internalised way, and for men it's more externalised, and how that can affect the gambling behaviours between the genders.
I think, as long as gambling's been about societally, it's been viewed as a very male-dominated area, whether it be something like races or football games or poker, darts, whatever. It's always seemed to be something that the man of the house got involved in. And I think in this kind of arena, a lot of gender stereotypes can come into play as well, where women are seen as the main caregivers, or seen as the person that looks after any type of dependence. So the idea that they're able to kind of use finances or have control over finances is a very outdated opinion, but it still is there when it comes to gambling. So there's that huge amount of stigma there that they could be a poor caregiver or that they shouldn't be involved in certain types of gambling. I feel like there's also that kind of stereotype around women are bingo and bingo only. But that's not the case, especially with women that we've seen supported. It's a variety of different gambling activities. So even the type of gambling is different, which can lead to kind of internalised experiences of participating in the activity, so it's more secretive or online, but also in the experiences of harm.
Yeah, I think for myself, with lived experience of gambling, I get to the stage where I always say this kind of anecdote of, if there was two flies going up that wall behind us, I would bet yous what fly would get to the top. And it's kind of like that's where gambling took me, but that is something that I share now, but I would never ever try to expose that was like a gambling problem. It was just like a bit of fun. I didn't, I think personally, I was in the bookies quite a lot. I wasn't like in the bingo, and I was kind of like, oh, I'm not following those female stereotypes. I'm going to do something a bit different, and I'm in with the men and all that, But really often it was a case of I'd be in the bookies for hours or in the casino for hours, but then I would go home and I'd be with friends and I wouldn't tell them that I'd been in the bookies. I wouldn't tell them that, I'd spent all that time there. So it was just an internalised experience for me. Like, I wanted to be present then, but of course I wasn't present because everything else had just, in my life, had just gone to pot, at certain stages. Whereas if men, for example, spend a lot of time in the bookies or casinos or at football matches or at the racing, it's like they're often quite happy to go and like kind of brag about the days spent there. It's like it's spoke about, it's like part of their routine. Whereas women, it's like, right, I can't speak about where I've been for the last 4 hours kind of thing, So it is a very different kind of space between the genders. Not to generalise, but that's what we've seen.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's slightly generalised, but there's not always patterns. And I've noticed there can be differences when it comes to like LGBT men, women, sort of traditional femininity, masculinity. If you lean slightly more towards being one of the boys, like you were saying, it's more outward. Whereas the secretive, shameful, hidden problems I'm noticing far more amongst stereotypically women. And the internalised harm tends to be the self-loathing, the guilt, the shame. And I know that men have a lot of self-loathing when it comes to having gambling disorders, but it tends to be more feelings of failure as a provider rather than failures as a human being or failures as a parent or a partner. They tend to see it as a gambling problem, whereas I've noticed women internalise it as I am the problem. It's very much more destructive internal harm, I've noticed. And self-stigmatising as well, like that. Men don't have the stigma of spending the day at the races, whereas if you spent a day at the bingo, when you have other responsibilities, there's much more societal shame as well. So other self-stigmatisation and general stigma as well towards women, and then they internalise all the harm And it's really destructive.
And I think going round in circles with your internalisation of your behaviour and the rut that you get in, and you're hitting rock bottom, things are just like the same day after day. It can be so destructive, can't it? When you're in a place and you might have sought help, but it's like the help is there, but you're just rattling around like a hamster in a cage sometimes. I know that's where I sometimes felt I was at. And there's that thing as well with women, they can't speak out about this because that idea as carers, as mothers, and I'm not a mother, I don't have pets, and I have to look after myself, and I was still in a really bad place. But that idea of as a female with a gambling problem, it's like you're not putting food in the kids' mouths, you're not like the shoes aren't going on the feet, that kind of thing. And maybe the way that women view that as a societal thing, or how society's going to look at them, is very different from how men think society is going to look at them, and even though men have issues with being providers and that pride and things like that, it's like they are able to just kind of almost compartmentalise that a little bit more than women, whereas we just like kind of take all of the burden, it feels, because that's what society puts on us anyway,
Even you should be able to do this for your kids. I only hear women saying I should be able to do this, I've got kids, whereas with men I just should be able to do this because I should be stronger than that, I should be better than that, whereas women, the people I care for, I should be better for them, and they're just adding another layer of guilt onto themselves. Because of societal expectations as carers, predominantly women. So again, another pressure, another reason for coping.
Yeah, 100%. Hitting rock bottom and making the decision to seek support can look very different between men and women. What barriers would you say women particularly face in taking that step?
I think it can be, first and foremost, that there's a fear of kind of lack of understanding. For a woman to talk about gambling, that the person they're speaking to is like, what do you mean? What do you mean women are gambling? You go to the bingo however often or whatever you do. What are you talking about? That's not an issue. So that's definitely something that they may not understand. You don't have to relate, but they just don't understand. To kind of touch back again about you talking about the role of being a caregiver or having dependents, there's such a huge fear that when women engage with services, and if they do have people in their care, that there's a kind of necessary evil of having social work involvement. So that's a huge barrier for women. And we talk about protective factors a lot when someone's trying to enter recovery. And for a lot of women, their children are their protective factors. That idea, like Katie said, I've got people that I need to care for that care about me. I should be able to get better for them. So that kind of fear of having them removed from their care is such a huge barrier for them accessing support. And just kind of, again, reacting to the stigma that's around it about how women in gambling are viewed. Eventually these externalised stereotypes create internal barriers, and they're the hardest to break down when women especially start believing what people are saying about them. And that's really, really hard and difficult to try and combat sometimes.
Even the structural barriers, so even the types of meetings, the support you can go to. If you've got childcare, you don't get to go to those things unless you admit to somebody else what the problem is. And can you watch the kids? Can you look after my mum? Or if they're working and doing childcare, the lack of space and time to get support, to attend these meetings, especially the evening kind of GA ones. But one that I have noticed, and I've checked with the women that I've been working with recently, sort of preparing for this conversation, going to meetings like GA, they are male dominated, which in itself isn't as big an issue. But what I have noticed, that especially if women are carrying any kind of trauma or difficulties, they are now sitting in environments where people are openly admitting to being abusive and manipulative, and it is incredibly triggering for them. So what I've noticed recently is the women that I've got that attend GA, they've got a side group on the WhatsApp group chat that's just for the women in that group, to create an extra safe space. Because obviously GA is a safe space for everybody, but there are women sitting there not feeling safe because they are sitting next to a man who is admitting manipulating the mum, abusing the wife, being verbally abusive, and that is really difficult for women. So they tend to then go and set up their own support within that support to create an even safer space. But I hadn't really thought of that until a client of mine mentioned it, and I've then asked others who attend GA, and they've all had the same issue, is that they have not really abused, manipulated or hurt people except themselves in the process of their gambling. I can think of a couple of instances, whether it's been things like theft or borrowing money with dishonest answers, but when they don't get their own way, there's not the same manipulation, abuse. So it's really challenging being a woman entering these spaces to begin with. But I've also heard some amazing stories from women who've been there, and the welcome and the appropriateness and the real thoughtfulness from the guys in the group. They are doing their best while also having to be honest themselves, but real structural and kind of safe space barriers. So there's a real plethora of reasons. So much going on there.
Yeah, because I often talk about like my first experience of entering GA. So I came clean to my partner in September 2021, and it was a case of, okay, ultimatum time. I will support you mentally, emotionally, financially, but you have to go and get help. So within 2 days, I was at my first GA meeting. Yeah, I've told this story over the years, but it'd be nice for the audience to hear this little anecdote in terms of, it was in a kind of church community setting, whereby there was 2 rooms to go into. One was like choir singing on the left-hand side, and the other one was like a GE meeting on a Wednesday night. And I entered into the GE meeting, kind of called ahead to say that I was coming, but it wasn't, whatever happened next. And I actually had my partner with me, and one of the guys stood up and said, "Here, Hen, I think you're in the wrong room," and it was kind of like that laid the ground for idea that, okay, like for a room of 40 men, like when a woman comes through, it's like, oh no, that's not her, she's not meant to be here, that's not the place that she's meant to be, or is she in the wrong room, she should be doing the choir singing. And then I was like, here pal, no, I'm in the right room, sort of thing. He's like, all right, okay then, no bother, come on in, and it's like you're part of the kind of the night and everything that goes after that. But yeah, even like that little anecdote, just that would never happen to a man walking through the door of GA meetings for the first time. Oh, here, mate, you're in the wrong room. Where's the choir singing?
But something as simple as that, and it probably wasn't even meant with any malintent, but that could have completely put up the walls for somebody and go, oh God, I'm not welcome here, so I'm not going to go back. But again, it's not meant with a bad intention, but it's just, again, that stigma, that kind of assumption that women shouldn't be entering a GA meeting.
100%, yeah. And in recovery, women are more likely to feel, as we were speaking about earlier, more exposed to shame and stigma in ways that a man wouldn't necessarily experience. In your opinions, how can that be combated?
Well, as I am the education officer, I do think education is one of the biggest things that can be done in order to combat barriers, going into as many women-oriented spaces as possible and starting that conversation. Just something as simple as raising awareness about gambling harms, what it looks like, what the signs are, because stigma is something that contributes largely to people not being able to identify when their gambling's at a point where it might need some support input. So I think education is definitely one of the biggest things, and normalising those conversations, normalising the fact that women experience harm, and they experience harm to the same levels as men, if not more so, because of how internalised it is. But yeah, definitely education from my standpoint.
Well, we need visibility, representation, because with gambling recovery, there are so few public figures that people can focus on to say, well, look, they've got this, and I could follow in their footsteps. I cannot think of a single woman, famous public figure, that has talked openly about this. Why I'm delighted about podcasts talking specifically about that. But people just don't realise it's something women, they barely realise it's such a problem for men, never mind women. Just a lack of awareness, understand we need people to open up, be honest when they're well into the recovery journey, if they're brave enough to talk about this, because they are alerting to other women in that situation. You're not the only one, this isn't just you. But the lack of understanding, we need this to become normalised conversation, even just understanding that to go to bingo, which is the typical, you have to walk through a sea of slot machines. People don't realise that. They've never been to bingo, that women are forced into casino type gambling situations, even just going for a wee drink with their pals at the bingo. The lack of understanding is so vast. It shocks me at times that people don't realise.
It's like the service design of the layout of bingo halls nowadays, isn't it?
It's all psychologically done.
Yeah, it's the same way as like supermarkets are set out. It's like you need to go through all the goodies and all the, or all the baddies to get to the milk. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
To the thing, to the staple that you're maybe going there for to do, like that.
Yeah. Also, we need to understand women are being specifically targeted by this industry as well. They know what the vulnerabilities of a lot of women are. So when you see the advertising for, I don't know if we're allowed to say particular companies, but your Foxy Bingo and things, they're now providing chat functions so that you can connect with other women who are at home on their own with new babies or older relatives, and they are really sneakily trying to get women into this. So we need to be much more sneaky in sort of combating them, bringing that out into the open and challenging it. But saying that you are being targeted specifically, it's not that you've fallen into some male-dominated things. That industry is now focusing on bringing as many people in as possible, and they know how to target women. And they are doing that deliberately. So it's not anybody's fault that they've fallen into this. It has been very deliberate. So even understanding that, it's becoming a bigger problem and will continue to if we don't get this out in the open.
I think this is even just to touch back on a point from before. Women, I think, have more stereotypically always been seen as affected others as well. That's something that women are maybe more known to be, the role of the wife, the role of the sister, the role of the mother of a man who's gambling. And that, again, doesn't help in terms of representation when it's women experiencing harm from their own gambling. That's something that, as Katie says, there is no visibility for whatsoever. It always seems to be the role of partner, wife, as a woman in someone else's life who's impacted by gambling harms, but not actually participating in the gambling themselves. And I think, the role of lived experience, such as yourself, Kat, is going to be so important, especially for women that have experienced harm from their own gambling, to give that a bit more spotlight, which it definitely is overdue.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because the Scottish Government actually came out and said that gambling is seen as a public health issue in the same way as alcohol and drugs.
Yes.
And yet it baffles me how it's not dealt with in the same way. It's not spoke about at Parliament, it's not spoke about in debates, it's not kind of an issue that it's almost like they don't, if you want to talk about drugs and alcohol because we understand it a little bit.
Yeah.
So somehow in Scotland, because it's part of our culture, it's part of, how you grow up. Not in every case, but we know what we're talking about here. But it's so interesting that the government can say that, and yet what are they doing about it? So there's so much work that we need to do on the ground level to kind of get that awareness out until the government really catch up with what they can do and have the powers to do.
What I would absolutely want, the first thing I would make anybody do for trying to understand that government ministers and things is watch the brain scans. See if you can see the science behind this. It's no different from alcohol, drugs. The brain lights up like a fireworks display because of the dopamine, and you start to understand that, okay, there's not a chemical being ingested, but there is a chemical at play here, that it will make a lot more sense of why it should fall in line with alcohol and drugs. And what we do know is the drug deaths are high in Scotland, or the alcohol drug deaths, but the suicide rate along with gambling is out of control.
Yes.
And that is the up and down of the dopamine cycle, the being cornered, trapped, misunderstood, and feeling no way out of it. If people could understand this is a chemical addiction and not just a behavioural one, that would be one step forward, and getting it treated like alcohol and drugs and getting it regulated and under control in the same way.
Exactly. The premise of gambling addiction is exactly the same as drugs and alcohol, and it's that idea of control. This thing, this behaviour this product is taking control over somebody's life, and as Katie said, the brain reacts the exact same. The same hormones are being released, the same kind of elation period is happening. And it's so much more fast acting because there's no biological process to tell you to stop doing it. You can only consume so much alcohol or drugs within a period of time before you overdose. There is no overdose for gambling. That should be a huge warning sign to anybody in a change-making position for the population of this country, because it is impacting health, it's impacting people in deprived areas, it's impacting fiscal costs, it's impacting everything,
Absolutely. As a little anecdote, it's strange because when I used to go to the casino, and there would always be somebody coming around trying to ask you, do you want a drink? And it wasn't a cup of tea that they were asking. And one of the things that I always did, strangely, when I was gambling in a casino for 4 or 5 hours at a time, is I didn't want alcohol, because alcohol almost dulled the experience. So a lot of people would say they definitely don't drink alcohol or take drugs when you're gambling, because you'll get even more erratic and you'll make less resilient, and you're not in a resilient place in the first place if you're gambling at that extent. But there'll be even more damage, let's put it that way. But I never ever wanted to have an alcoholic drink, because it was like the gambling was the first and foremost thing that I wanted to ingest, even though I wasn't ingesting it. I was ingesting it, but psychologically. But somehow alcohol would make me less present. So it's a kind of strange little thing that I used to do. People might be different. But fortunately, there is support out there for women experiencing their own gambling and who are affected by the gambling of others. And with this in mind, can you share a little bit about your partnership with Ayla around this?
Yes, so RCA Trust, in partnership with Simon Community, Third Sector Lab and a steering group of women with lived and living experience of gambling harm, came together to create a website called Ayla. And Ayla is a website created by women in Scotland for women in Scotland at risk of or experiencing gambling harm. It's a website with so many resources on it. You can chat to someone via live chat who is a member of our gambling team here at RCA Trust. There's a section for professionals where professionals can get access to upskilling training, advice on how to start that conversation. There's a full section on actually understanding gambling harm and putting it into the context of women's experiences with things like cyclical changes, menopause, kind of having dependence and stuff like that. But one of the best and the most amazing elements of the website that we're certainly proud of is the Lived and Living library, where you can hear real stories from real women in lots of different formats. There's poems, there is some prose, there's videos, there's audio messages, and it covers lots of different kind of nuances of experience. As we know, no experience is the same. It's a fantastic website, and it wouldn't be as amazing as it is without the steering group of women that contributed to it. So I would encourage you all to go and have a look at it. It's ayla-scotland.co.uk. and you can have a look at it there. But it's such an amazing kind of trailblazing resource for women, especially in Scotland. It also has its own tartan, so go check that out. Cute wee colour scheme as well.
I know I've certainly signposted women to the Ayla website, even just to see that you're not the only one with this problem. In fact, we've recognised it so much that we are creating entire resources based around it just to prove that they're less alone, but also with our wonderful colleague that I use her as my little fountain of knowledge. She's a great resource when I don't know where else to signpost somebody to. Is there a specific group for women on Wednesdays? And she will find that for me. So I'm so appreciative of the Ayla stuff. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, it's shone a light on women in gambling, but from a Scottish perspective, which you don't even see in research level. It's always England and Wales focused. So to have something that's Scottish, that's relatable, and it uses real women, it's something that I think we should all be very, very proud of. And I'm hoping that it will break down a lot of barriers for women and increase access to support. That's why it was made, with the goal to help women.
And I can testify to how amazing the experience was, because I'm very proud to say that I was part of the Lived Experience Design Group, and which started last September and went on for 8 months. And it was one of the best experiences I've ever had in terms of being in a room with so many powerful women who were moving in the same direction with something very special around combating gambling harms, whether it was harms that we'd done to ourselves or whether it was harms that had been done to us. It didn't matter. And it was a very powerful experience, and it was great. So ayla-scotland.co.uk, check it out if you're listening to the podcast, with some just really, really vital information and support on there. Finally, can you share a story of positive healing and gambling recovery by women you've supported at RCA Trust?
Sure. We'll call her Christina. That's my boss's name. She comes to mind because the harm she experienced was so incredible, because she'd gotten into gambling debts and had stolen money from her partner's savings, and felt so awful when she admitted this that she went and handed herself into police, admitting a crime, which meant they didn't really have much choice but to treat her as a criminal. And she had 2 young sons and living with her partner, and they removed her from the home. She had to go and live in a hotel, for several months in the run-up to her first part of her criminal trial, and experienced so much trauma damage as a result of that, having, living with a kettle and a microwave away from her kids. There was social work involvement, the threat of losing her kids. But she did so much work to bring an evidence packet to this judge about all the changes she was making. We found every resource we could, including through Ayla, to make this document evidence packet as thick and as detailed as possible. And we were told that the judge was, and I quote, blown away by what she had brought and the changes she had made. And she was so convinced that with this conviction that she would never be able to work again or have any kind of meaningful work. And she managed to get herself a wee shop job for a couple of days a week, through a friend, and bit by bit has gone on, is now working full time, is considering going back into education. She's back with her kids. There's been so much healing and bonding, and she's got this mad open and honest relationship with these boys, our sons, that I'm in such admiration of somebody who I started speaking to in her hotel room on the phone, and and now she's just showing off. It is amazing. I can't praise her enough. And if she listens to this, you know who you are. You've done amazing. But there's been a couple of women I know who've been involved in the criminal justice system because of that level of honesty and desire to be punished for what they've done. And my God, I have my criticisms of the justice system and police for how they've handled it, given that, they're not really a danger to anyone except maybe their partner's savings. But the ability of women to recover and do well and move on from this is just so admirable. I cannot stress enough how much better women are at fighting back and becoming better. Like, obviously we can all do it, all genders and everything, but women, it's something special with the level of harm they experience to where they can get to. And I now believe that's possible for everybody, regardless of how bad the harm is. So keep the faith. You've got this.
That's a great story. Well done, Christina. Thank you so much, Maria, Katie, for sharing your knowledge, ideas and opinions on today's episode and theme. Before you go, can you say a little about how people can find more information about RCA Trust if they want to access the support you provide?
Yeah, of course. So we are called RCA Trust, as has been mentioned throughout this episode. We are based in Paisley. If you want to have a chat to us, you can contact us on the phone number 0141 887 0880. You can also find us on Ayla. Our information is on there. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and X, formerly Twitter. There's also a support contact form on our website as well. We know sometimes phoning and stuff can be really, really daunting for a lot of people. So you can fill out that form within your own time. Just ask a few questions and that will be set straight on to us and someone will be in contact with you. However you want to get in touch with us, we will meet you where you're at and make sure that you're comfortable to start support with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you both.
No problem. Thank you for having us, Kat.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please do join me on the next episode where we'll be talking about shame and why stigma still exists for women gamblers. Thank you so much for listening and catch you next time on No Dice, a 12-episode series discussing female gambling addiction and women's recovery journeys across Scotland.